When it's football time, it's Fanatiz time. Get a front row seat at the world's largest stadium and enjoy live and on-demand games from the Spanish La Liga, the best of the passionate South American soccer, and much, much more for only $7.99 a month. Watch anytime and anywhere. From your awkward ride in a taxi, during your afternoon video conference, or even hiding from your family in the bathroom. Sign up today at fanatiz.com/sports and try it for 7 days. Fanatiz, the world's largest stadium.
What is up, Hardwood Knocks listeners? I am Dan Favale coming at you with one of my favorite writers and Twitter follows, Sabrina Merchant. She writes lots of words, let's put it, for SB Nation. NBA, she's covering different women's sports. I've seen her write some college basketball stuff this week. If you're not following her on Twitter, remedy that post haste. That's at Sabrina JM. That's at SABREENAJM. Sabrina, welcome back, and how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I love when people spell my name because everyone always searches for Sabrina with an I, and that is not the correct way of finding me.
I like the way yours is spelled because I feel like there's 2 or 3 like other different first names in there too.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes,
I appreciate it. I was looking because you're still one of the guests that is nice enough to record on Skype. Everyone thinks I'm living in like the early 2010s. It's just that's been the most reliable way for me to record. And I feel like I just spoke with you about the Clippers, and it turns out that was in October. So my sense of time is clearly not doing too well at the moment.
Yeah, well, for me, it's literally my second most recent Skype call, so it does feel like it just happened.
I do appreciate you if you have to hide your confusion as to whenever I'm asking you if you can hop on Skype. Most people are like, is it 2012 or something? But you just roll with it. So I appreciate that.
Let's do this.
So I brought you on to talk Clippers and Lakers. Double dose here. I'd like to start with the Clippers, who are coming off as we record this, they're coming off their win over Dallas, it was, believe. I can commit to having watched exactly 0 minutes of that game. But overall this season, have you noticed any distinct changes in how the Clippers play under Ty Lue, aside from anything that's personnel driven by having Serge shoot jumpers instead of having Trez in those minutes?
Yeah, so I think you hit the nail on the major stylistic change in that they have more space in the starting lineup because they're starting Serge instead of Zubac, and he just is a willing three-point shooter, I should say. Not even a better three-point shooter, but he actually takes threes, and he's feared from that distance. So it opens a lot of space in the paint for Kawhi Leonard and Paul George to sort of operate out of the post and on the elbows a little bit more than they were able to when Zubac was the starter. I think that's the major difference, just the look of that half-court offense. And there has been a significant amount of ball movement, I think, that's been added to that half-court offense. But I'm not sure how much of that, again, is because of Ty Lue versus Doc or just different personnel, because they have Nicholas Batum in the starting lineup, or what they did before yesterday, who is a more natural passer, I think, than Marcus Morris. So those personnel shifts, I think, make that, a more ball movement heavy starting five than it was a year ago. But it also seems like they have just a little bit more flow beyond the initial action. Like when you have a guy like Kawhi Leonard or someone like Paul George who's so capable of getting their shot in isolation, and you only have to like run one down screen and all of a sudden PG's free and he's got a 6-foot guy in front of him who can just shoot right over. Like it's tempting to just do that. And like that was a lot of what they were doing a year ago, especially when, they had a limited amount of time when Kawhi and PG were on the court together because of injuries and whatnot. I totally understood that, default, but there has been more commitment to like, okay, if the initial action fails, like what do we have running on the second side? There's, side pick and roll or like a weak side action running. There's definitely a little bit more happening in the half court than there was a year ago. But I do think that that's sort of come at the expense of like, they don't really push the ball at all, or like,
right.
their defense has been a little marginalized, so to speak. So, I think that's just a consequence of Ty Lue, right? Like we think of him as an offensive coach. I really think he got the very most out of those Cleveland teams on the offensive end. And that has brought itself over to the Clippers, where I think they're supremely talented on offense and they're getting the most out of their talent. But you see the gaps, in other parts of the court.
Does it? And so you mentioned that they're playing slower, which I think would, if you're going to get out in transition less, and I feel like they just don't even try and push the ball.
They literally do not.
Yeah, like live rebounds, turnovers, they just don't. Is that like the main culprit behind them being 29th in the share of shots coming at the rim? And my follow-up question to that would be, does it matter when they're still third in points scored per possession and they shoot the hell out of the ball from three?
Yeah, I think they definitely want to get more shots at the rim. It's just not really in any of their DNA, you know? I think the only guy in the starting lineup who really put pressure on the rim last year was Ivica Zubac, and he's not a starter anymore. So it's just harder for them to generate shots in that area of the court. Generally, when they get touches in the paint, it's just so they can kick it back out for threes, and they're shooting really well on threes. So obviously there is a method to that madness. But I definitely think they would like to get more shots in the paint. Whether that comes from transition, which Ty Lue talks about all the time, is pace, pace, pace. But it's just, again, like those guys on their team aren't really wired to get to the basket. We think about like Kawhi Leonard, and you think about him like in the mid range, you know, and Paul George is just a really sweet shooter, and Nicholas Batum pretty much at this point in his career, all he does is spot up. Even Marcus Morris is more of a mid range out guy, and Serge, for whatever reason, has lost a lot of his touch around the rim. So he's significantly more effective when you put him out as a jump shooter. It's just their personnel doesn't really suggest that they want to take shots directly at the basket. I'm of the belief that they should be starting Zubac and thus generating more looks at the rim that way. But that does not appear to be a direction that the Clippers are headed towards. So yeah, I mean, I think they want to get more shots in the paint, even though, like you said, their offense is pretty great regardless. And I don't think there's a reason to believe that their jump shooters are not capable of this level of performance, you know, other than Batum, who obviously had just a terrible season in Charlotte last year. Like everybody's pretty much right in line with their career recent norms. So it doesn't seem out of the ordinary that they could continue shooting this way if these are the shots they're going to generate.
It still blows my mind that Batum is third on this team in minutes per game. That just might be one of the most bizarre developments of the season. I guess you do look at the Clippers, though, as you kind of mentioned it. There's like no one, because if you look at their team, they only have two guys who rank higher than the 52nd percentile in just frequency of their shots coming at the rim, and it's Zoo, and then it's Terrence Mann. But then you look at everyone else, and it's like there's no one who really can, because you mentioned how Kawhi Leonard and Paul George have historically played. I think Marcus Morris is capable of, he's in the 0th percentile of volume at the rim right now relative to his position. So he's like the one guy you could look at and say, well, he should probably be getting there more often, but they just don't have that type of player on this team. And even just, I think with Zoo, when he's going to put pressure on the rim, like it's not going to be with the ball in his hands, or maybe Trez at least provided a little bit of that last year. And that's also not something that Serge Ibaka is going to give you at least consistently.
Yeah, I mean, I think you nailed it. You know, Zoo is going to get shots at the rim, but that's just because he happens to be standing there when he's passed the ball, right? And I think we kind of thought of Lou Williams as a guy who could put some pressure on the rim because he does run a lot of pick and roll and like get actions moving in that direction. But a lot of that was just because he had Trez as a pick and roll partner.
Right.
And he was the guy who was just rolling really hard to the basket every single time you gave him the ball. And it's funny because I've sort of done like a little bit of I'm not going to say a total 180 on Trez, but I've shifted like 90 degrees or so, because the way he ended last season, it was overwhelmingly clear that like the Clippers needed something else in that spot because they didn't trust Zubac enough to play him significant minutes, which I think is a bigger story in and of itself. But if you're not going to trust Zubac, then you need somebody else to take those center minutes. And obviously Trez was not the guy to, you know, go up against those big burly dudes like, you know, even Boban in the first round, and then obviously Nikola Jokic in the second round of the playoffs when they lost. But there's a certain level of energy that Montrez brings, whether that's just that he's, you know, ramming his way to the hoop at every possible opportunity, or just like the general vibe that he brings to the game. The Clippers really miss that, just in terms of that effort level that you have on a night-to-night basis that Montrez brings. And I'm not sure how much that'll matter during the playoffs when like you're naturally just like hyped up to play every single night. But during the regular season, you really miss it. And you've seen it on the Lakers where like they need that, right? Like they're going through this championship malaise, and Montrez is like, nah, hell no. Like I'm going to play exactly this hard every single night, no matter what. So it's an interesting like dynamic of what he brings. Like I'm not sure how much the Clippers miss it like going forward, but you kind of notice it right now.
The actual concern would be, at least when you look at it on paper, is their defense being 22nd in points allowed per possession, which I never would have guessed this far into the year. Can you identify like a root cause behind what's happening here for them?
So for me, the defense is weird. Those numbers are really, really weird. But when Paul George and Kawhi Leonard are on the court, they're perfectly fine defensively. And when Patrick Beverley joins them, they're excellent defensively. So I happen to think it's a matter of them not having their best players on the court as much. And you can say like, oh, well, that was the case last year too, right? Like PG missed a bunch of time and Pat Bev was in and out of the lineup. But Paul and Kawhi pretty much always played together last year. So you were really maximizing their defensive potential together. And then those bench lineups, like you can say whatever you want about like the Reggie, Lou Williams, Montrezl Harrell things, like they just brought so much energy that it kind of worked defensively, at least during the regular season, you know? And then this year, there's a pretty strict stagger of Kawhi and PG's minutes. And so you're not getting the defensively suffocating lineups that you were last year as often. And so I think, you know, when you get down the stretch into games that really matter, they're going to be playing together a lot more often. So the lineups that have been good defensively are going to be together more, you know, on the court more frequently. And you're not going to get these like Luke Kennard, Lou Williams, Reggie Jackson lineups that just hemorrhage points as often. So I do believe that like Ty Lue tolerates more defensive slippage than Doc Rivers does. Like I think we're seeing that in Philly, where they're still prioritizing defensive lineups that don't shoot threes, even though Daryl Morey is the general manager there now, right? So there's definitely a difference in philosophy among these two guys, but the personnel is so good for the Clippers, and when they're together, that has borne out that I'm not as concerned as like 22nd in the league would suggest.
Do you get concerned at all by their crunch time performance in general? It's been, such a small sample size, but they take so many threes during the stretches there, and their offense has not been great, their defense has not been great, or is it just you just kind of write that off as a bunch of noise because of, again, if they've been in a bunch of games that have leaked into those minutes, but it's just, I think it's, 19 games, but the minutes are, you know, clearly under sub 100 right now.
Right, I think it's like even sub 50, but the thing with the crunch time is, I mean, I hate to say this, but there's like some bad karma hanging over the Clippers, you know? And I don't want to be the person that like brings narrative into this, but sometimes I think it's relevant. You know, the Clippers had a really bad go of it in crunch time in the playoffs last year, and they famously blew a lot of leads, and it wasn't pretty. And, you know, you've got the eternal Luka Doncic clip that's going to be played on his highlight reel for years and years to come. And obviously all of those blown leads to Denver. So to me, it's more of a mental block than anything. Because yeah, their offense looks a little bit different. Like I think they get a little stagnant, which tends to happen during crunch time, especially when you have a guy like Kawhi or even Paul George, again, who can get a shot anytime. It's kind of tempting to just say like, hey, do your thing, even though we know we can run better offense. And my guess is that as the season gets further along, they'll be more, let's say, creative in their crunch time offense and actually try to run things instead of just, you know, one screen, PG's got a good look at a three, let's shoot it. But I also just think like there is something in their head, you know, like this is a team that screwed up pretty badly last year and has a history of some playoff, you know, catastrophe. So what I think is they just need like one or two games where they do really well in the clutch and like sort of just get the monkey off their back. Like I thought the Dallas game was really good yesterday because it wasn't technically crunch time for the majority of it because like Dallas only got to within 4 for like 40 seconds or so, but they actually ran like real offense. You know, like PG had a big shot down the stretch, you know, the 3-pointer that sort of put the game away. They were locked in defensively. You know, I just think they need like a couple of those games to just sort of right the ship and turn the direction, because I don't think there's anything fundamentally different about the way they can play for the first 43 minutes versus the way they play for the last 5. Because it's not like they're an isolation heavy offense, you know, for the first 43 minutes. Like you shouldn't be able to gear in on their guys like the way the defenses have been able to. So I'm of the belief that it's kind of just a fluke, but like I'm not 100% certain that they can work their way out of it just because it's the Clippers, you know, like there's something there.
I guess there's also just the temptation. I think every team has that temptation, and you normally see it from teams that like aren't very good overall. Like that's what they revert to. But if you have a really good, and they have two good stars that can go one-on-one. And I think with Kawhi Leonard, since he's entered that superstar mold, that's sort of always been the temptation. I mean, Toronto cleared it out for him a bunch during crunch time. And so I guess that does add an element of predictability, but at the same time, is it necessarily the wrong decision? I feel like anytime there's missed crunch time opportunities, there's always the harp like, well, why wasn't there more ball movement, or why did they settle for this shot, or hold the ball for so long, or only put it in one guy's hands?
Yeah, and to me, the real problem with their crunch time is their defense. They've been running the small lineup with Marcus Morris at the 5 a lot during the end of games, and that has been just an absolute tire fire on the defensive end. Like, they can't rebound the ball to save their lives. It really cost them against Brooklyn. DeAndre Jordan was just bullying them on the glass down the stretch. And I know that that's a unit that Ty Lue likes a lot. He talks a lot about practicing with that lineup and how they have to get good playing small. And it was just bumming him out at the beginning of the season that they couldn't go to it because Marcus wasn't healthy. And, just based on Ty Lue's history, it seems like if they can get a 5-out offensive lineup on the court at the end of games, it's something he's going to want to do. So that's where I would look for like potential improvement, is if that lineup can start to hold its own defensively, because I have a hunch it's going to get used pretty often.
That seems like and I have this jotted down later, but it seems like that could become like maybe insofar as they have one, a go-to crunch time lineup in the playoffs, at least against certain matchups.
Your company's salary cap is probably tighter, and you can't afford to miss on a new hire. Every person you add needs to fit just right. Indeed.com is the hiring site that helps you find quality candidates instantly, so you can do the part you really need faster, meeting and hiring great people. Indeed searches through the millions of resumes in their database to help show you great candidates instantly. With Instant Match, you see a list of great candidates with zero wait. Want our quality shortlist fast? You need Indeed. Right now, our listeners get a free $75 credit to upgrade your job post at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. This is Indeed's best offer anywhere. Get a free $75 credit at Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Indeed.com/Blue Wire. Offer valid through March 31st. Terms and conditions apply.
Hardwood Knocks listeners, if you're like me, your foray into adulthood has not included thinking too much about the sheets on which you sleep. You've probably had the same set for years, perhaps since you were in college or something disgusting along those lines, and you just wash them, rewash them, and then throw them back on your bed haphazardly, I might add. Sleep on them, don't give them a second thought. Little might you know, though, comfortable sheets can make all the difference. And that's why there's Brooklinen. They work directly with manufacturers to make luxury available directly to you without the luxury level markups. Brooklinen has a variety of sheets, colors, patterns, and materials to fit your needs and tastes. Brooklinen also has over 50,000 5-star reviews and counting. They are so confident in their product that they even offer a 365-day money-back guarantee. And Brooklinen is also so much more than sheets. They've got comforters, pillows, towels, even loungewear, and more. Go to brooklinen.com and use promo code KNOX to get $25 off when you spend $100 or more, plus free shipping. That's BROOKLINEN.com and enter promo code KNOX to get $25 off when you spend $100 or more, plus free shipping. brooklinen.com and use promo code KNOX at checkout. Should Kawhi Leonard be getting more MVP love, or just, you just look at his numbers and I know this season is weird, but they're absolutely absurd. 56% on twos. That's the second highest mark of his career. He's hitting 39.8% of his threes, also the second mark of his career, 26 and 5 basically. And he can still, it's Kawhi Leonard. He can just clamp down defensively whenever he wants. Should he be? I think it was, at least until Joel Embiid's injury, it felt like a LeBron, Jokic, Embiid conversation where I leaned that I thought it was more going to be Embiid, Jokic. But should he be in like that Giannis tier at least, where it's like, hey, these guys can still wedge their way into this?
So at the start of the season, I thought that Kawhi should be in the MVP conversation a little bit more, and I would say up until like the last 2 weeks or so, I was on that, wavelength, but. There's got to be like some measure of team success here. And as the Clippers sort of falter a little bit, I think Kawhi gets some of the blame for that. I actually think that Giannis has sort of surpassed him on the MVP conversation, which, I mean, Giannis is never going to win because they're not going to give him 3 in a row without winning a title. Let's just be real, regardless of how good of a season he's having. But yeah, I mean, Kawhi Leonard, like individually, these stats are just bonkers, right? Like you ran them down. Offensively, I feel like he just gets more and more gifted the longer he stays with the Clippers. Like his playmaking is just off the charts impressive right now. The types of reads he's able to make in the half court offense are just like, I didn't know that he had that in his bag before he got to Los Angeles. And it's really important to how the Clippers even function because they don't have a traditional point guard, right? Like they put the ball in Kawhi's hands or Paul's hands and make them go to work, and it's able to be a really, really effective offense because of the type of vision that Kawhi has in the half court. So yeah, I mean, he's been outstanding on that end of the floor. I do think that defensively, you know, he doesn't turn on that like Kawhi Leonard defensive player of the year gear very often anymore. You saw it actually. I'm going to bring up this Dallas game again that you watched 0 minutes of, but he was excellent. Really just truly excellent down the stretch of that game yesterday. During the entire second half, like that was legitimately the best defense I've ever seen Kawhi play in a Clippers uniform.
It's a great game not to watch, it sounds like.
Yeah. The only reason I would say that maybe he doesn't belong in that conversation to the same extent as like, you know, Giannis, LeBron, and those other second tier candidates is just because I don't think that he's been fully engaged on that end of the floor. And you know, it's hard to like say, oh, well, Kawhi's an excellent defensive player, but the Clippers are 22nd on defense, right? Like I know I give a lot of caveats for that, but at a certain point he has to take some responsibility for that. And if the Clippers are going to stay in like that 4th range in the West, then it's hard for me to push them ahead of those other guys that you mentioned.
Do you know why it seems that Paul George is so high variance? Does it have anything to do with him coming back from the right foot injury he had? Right now he feels like the most likely player in the NBA to go 8 of 11 from 3, but then 1 of 8 the next night, or vice versa.
It's interesting. I hadn't really noticed that until you brought it up, and you're absolutely right that he's been super hit or miss since that injury, and maybe that's it, right? Like he had a foot injury, swollen toe, I want to say, an edema, and I have to imagine that that's super painful when you're wearing basketball shoes, and it's probably got to affect your footwork when you're, you know, going up for jump shots. The thing with PG though is like he's always gonna be guarded out there, right? Mm-hmm. Even if he goes 1 for 8 or whatever. So the spacing is obviously very important. To me, I thought, God, I just keep doing this. It's really important when he just stops forcing it and like tries to get to the hoop. I know he's made a big fuss recently about how he doesn't get foul calls like other superstars do. It's been like throughout my career, I've never been a guy to get into the foul game. And I don't know if that's true or not, but definitely this year, he hasn't really been getting to the foul line. But I think it's so important when he actually just tries to get into the paint and, you know, even generate some of those like Kobe assists where like enough guys collapse on him that like Zoo can get an offensive rebound or somebody else can clean up the miss, which again, he did yesterday against the Mavericks, but I'm so sorry. I really should totally like give myself new sources of material. But yeah, I don't know if that's like something we can count on going forward, that PG's just going to be like inconsistent. He was so hot to start the season, like just unbelievably good shooting numbers from Paul George. Like his true shooting percentage was just off the charts. So it's totally understandable to expect like some regression from that. But I would hope that like as he gets more and more removed from that injury absence, that his consistency starts to come up again. Because like, I mean, 8 of 11, like we're not going to expect that very often, but he should be making like, you know, 4 threes a game. Like, I don't know why these singular performances keep happening.
What have you, and you kind of talked about this already, what have you thought of Serge Ibaka's fit so far? And again, the spread element is there. Is there anything that you view as, does he bring anything else to you? Because in Toronto, it always kind of felt like if he wasn't getting his like 12 or something shots a game, I wasn't sure how much he was going to impact. Do you think there's like an element that they're lacking now because of him? Would you view him as a decided upgrade for this roster relative to how they played last season?
I think Serge is definitely better than Montrez for what the Clippers are trying to do, because they don't have to put the ball in his hands as much as Montrez had it. And that benefits like the rest of the guys they have on the roster. And it also provides them extra level of rim protection because their power forwards are not really, you know, going to help in that respect at all. Like Marcus Morris is not a last line of defense kind of guy. Nicholas Batum is absolutely not that kind of guy. So you need to have that from your center position. And it, you know, in that respect, Serge definitely more than what Trez was giving for the Clippers. I also think it's quite helpful that he and Kawhi are friends, because there was, some tension in the Clipper locker room last year.
Was there?
And, some of it can be traced back to a guy who is now on the Lakers, but Serge and Kawhi are buddies from Toronto, and there is definitely more of a feeling of like good vibes from the Clippers this year, even when they lose. So I don't think you can understate that. Like it's got to help when you're going through this season where you literally can't do anything but play basketball and hang out with your family, that like the guys you're playing basketball with are actually good dudes and you enjoy being around them, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm glad that they have that element. But I also think that Serge, I think I mentioned this earlier, like it's kind of comical how bad his touch around the basket is at this point. Like, I don't know when it went away. Like, I got to be honest, I pay less attention to him when he was in the Eastern Conference than when he was in the West. So it's been like since 2016 when I was watching him on the reg, and I thought he was like a really good finisher. And that is not really the case anymore, which is why I think the Clippers space him as often as possible. There's like a little bit of ego involved with Ibaka. Like you mentioned, if he's not getting his 12 shots, like 12 shots is a lot of shots. And there is an argument to be made that he does not deserve that many shots on an offense that also has all of these other weapons that we've talked about. But the Clippers make it a point to run like the first play of the game for him at the beginning of the game and at the start of the third quarter. And he's starting the game instead of Ivica Zubac, which, again, I've mentioned that I think that's a mistake, but he's still doing it. And I don't think he's the same like switchable defender that we might have thought Serge was earlier in his career. Like you put him on an island with a guard, I think he's getting blown by these days. Whereas Zoo has sort of shown more of an ability to be effective in those situations. So there's like very specific things that Ibaka does well, right? Like he's going to give you those jumpers. He is like a pretty decent passer out of the short roll these days. Like that's a very helpful action for the Clippers to run. And again, like good rim protector, but he kind of gets, when he gets outside of himself, like when he decides like, I'm going to post up on this possession, it's bad. And there's not really anything you could do about it. So I don't think it's an accident that like he hasn't been closing that many games. Ty Lue goes with Zubac a lot, and he goes with Marcus Morris at the 5 a lot. And, he often says post-game, like, oh, there were only 4 minutes left, and I didn't think it was fair to Serge, like, get him back up when he's been cold for the whole fourth quarter. And it's like, well, that's a very convenient excuse. You could just say, I think the other guys are better at this point in the game, which is what I think is happening.
No matter how many times I watch Zubac, I'm always caught off guard by his foot speed. Like he just doesn't look like he has that type of juice in his feet. And the question actually I have for you is, do you view him as like the Clippers' third most important player at this point? Or if it's not him, who do you look at it as?
So I've been on the bandwagon that Patrick Beverley is the Clippers' third most important player pretty much since the start of the 2019-20 season. I think it's harder and harder to say that Zoo is not their third best player, honestly, because he's just damn good at protecting the rim. He rolls so hard. He sets such good screens, like just bone-crushing screens. It's just a lost art in the NBA, honestly, and I love the way Zubac plays. But I do think that the Clippers can sort of manage without him, not for extended stretches, but like you can put Ibaka in the game and still get your rim protection, and you can play like Patrick Patterson or Marcus Morris at the 5 and still get some spacing. And there are ways to kind of fill in for Zubac when he's unavailable, which, let's be clear, never happens because he has never missed a game due to injury as a Clipper. Which you think about all of the injuries that the Clippers have gone through over the last 2 years, he's the one constant. Like I think in his entire Clipper tenure, he might have like sat out one game against the Warriors in the playoffs just because he couldn't hang with them. But like, that's it, like he's always available. Which brings us to Patrick Beverley, who's kind of the opposite side of the coin, where the Clippers don't have anybody to replicate Patrick Beverley, right? Like he is their only good defender at the point of attack. I think he's a little bit better now on guys who are slightly bigger, maybe off ball, but he's still the best guy you have on point guards. And that's an important trait to have in the Western Conference. Let's be clear. There's a lot of really dynamic lead guards that the Clippers could come up against in the playoffs. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think you saw it like really just displayed for everyone to see in the playoffs against Dallas when Patrick Beverley missed the final 5 games of that series, and Luka Doncic and Trey Burke was even just lighting up the Clippers because they had no resistance at the point guard position. And, we talk about how like the Clippers don't really have a playmaker at that spot, and Patrick Beverley is basically like a 3-and-D wing who happens to be in a point guard sized body. but at least like he can bring the ball up against pressure. At least he makes attempts to drive to the basket, like off of closeouts, and can ping the ball around a little bit on offense. There's just, I don't know that you can really trust Reggie Jackson to play that role in the playoffs because he's just a turnstile defensively. And we've seen that over and over again. Even if he is the one guy on the Clippers who brings like a modicum of pace, in terms of bringing the ball up the court, I don't think you can trust Lou Williams for more extended minutes in the playoffs because we have, like a decade's worth of evidence on Lou Williams.
He would push back against that, and he would struggle to do it accurately. But yes, you are correct.
I do think like Lou Williams was a little bit was actually better than people realized in the playoffs last year. But like, who cares when you're losing in the second round after being up 3-1? Right. And then they brought in Luke Kennard, who they thought was going to be that guy as a playmaker, and he's not even in the rotation at this point. He's only available when somebody else is, ruled out for injury, like he has been recently. But Patrick Beverley, like he's the guy. He's the one point guard you can count on, and that's why I think he's the third most important. Just because like he leaves a gaping hole on the roster when he's not there. But I think we're coming to the point where like Zubac is the third best, and I know that like Clippers fans are trying to work out all these fake trades to get guys to come to LA. The only way any of these trades work is if you're willing to move Zubac, and I don't think the Clippers should do that.
Yeah, the salaries of some of the players that the Clippers seem to be interested in is just like, okay, it's not even just Zubac. It's like, are you trading Beverly or Marcus Morris? Like, you're not matching Kyle Lowry's salary. You're not even Ricky Rubio. I think that was from Sports Illustrated. So do you not? I'm jumping around here for time purposes. So do you not ascribe to what feels like the prevailing sentiment that they do need another point guard, or is it more about, as you mentioned with Jackson, you want someone who can maybe bring some pace without being an absolute sieve on the defensive end? Or do you think that they actually need something other than a point guard leading into not even necessarily the trade deadline, but if you have any targets that spring to mind, but just at large, something that could come back to bite them during the playoffs?
Yeah, I don't think they really need any upgrades on the offensive end. I don't watch their crunch time offense and think like, oh, we need another lead guard to help them sort out, this stagnation. I don't think that's the case. So to me, it's not really like, oh, a point guard would fix all of the ills that the Clippers have. I just don't see it that way. I am coming to the point where I'm not sure if Patrick Beverley is going to be available on the court as long as you need him in the playoffs because, he missed a lot of games last season. He missed 5 games in the playoffs, and he was a shell of himself in that Denver series. So I'm kind of, reaching like maybe a George Hill type situation where, you just need a guy who's going to be there, right? And I know he's a little bit older, he's a little bit creaky, but so is Pat Beverley, and George Hill at least didn't miss any playoff games last season. He kind of fits that defensive ethos that you're looking for, and that he can switch, with that 5-man lineup that the Clippers like to close with. He's a good 3-point shooter. He kind of just fills in what you're looking for with Pat with more reliability, right? Mm-hmm. But I don't look at the trade landscape and see a guy where he's going to crack the top 8 of the Clippers rotation and can be had for the limited assets the Clippers are willing to part with, right? So that's sort of where I land. I don't think they need a playmaker. Like, I just don't think that's what it is. But I am concerned about Patrick Beverley being ready to go, which is why I think they should make meaningful, ploys to Oklahoma City to like, hey, I know we've given you everything we already have, but like, we need this guy.
Look, you've shorted enough if you're Oklahoma City. You've shorted enough of the Clippers' future. You might as well just keep shorting it. So if you can get, they do have those Detroit seconds too, which have to be semi-attractive.
That's true. I was really excited when the original asking price on PJ Tucker was 3 seconds, and I was like, oh, well, the Clippers have like Detroit seconds. Like, those are good seconds. But then apparently that has since been upgraded to a first-round pick because the market is.
Oh, it's been upgraded? I did not see that.
I
thought they'd be lucky to get multiple seconds for him at this point, given the way he's played and that he's just not with the team.
Been just god-awful, hasn't he?
Yeah, something tells me this might be a James Harden situation where he plays a little bit better on a team that matters. But yeah, the 2 names I came up with, and now please brace yourself because they're clearly doorbusters. And I talked myself out of the first one. DeLon Wright, I thought could be helpful as some defensive optionality, and then he could put some pressure on the rim, but I don't think he cracks unless he's shooting threes like he was for part of the season in Detroit off the catch. But then he gets injured, and also the money is just he makes $9 million, which isn't a lot. But then it's like, are you giving up Lou Williams in a trade for DeLon Wright? Mm-hmm. And I think Lou Williams would be more valuable in the playoffs because from scratch scoring is more valuable. So I've settled on Sterling Brown. I thought maybe if you brought it, I was saying that if they don't think Beverley, I wasn't even talking about his injury. My thought process was they don't think he's the guy to go up against some of these like guards. Sterling Brown is more than capable of doing that, and he comes with the added benefit of no, you don't want to put the ball in his hands, even though Houston has, because I mean it's freaking Houston right now.
Yeah, of course.
But he's he's hitting his threes, and to get that defensive mindset, I don't know what it would take. But the Rockets signed him for nothing. They don't have his bird right, so if you can turn that player that you got essentially for free into a second round pick, I would think that'd be valuable, and it works. If you can trade Fiondu just to the Rockets, like that's how you. And I think Brown's making the minimum anyway, so you don't even need to technically send anyone out. But for the Clippers, their hard cap situation is, I guess, dire would be the word.
It's dire. Yes, that is correct. That's an interesting one, Sterling Brown. I'm gonna hit on DeLon Wright first because I actually wrote about him a little bit over the offseason, like a sort of sign and trade with Montrez. I just really like his size at that position, in terms of like being, again, a guy who can switch on to wings and you're not worried about it. And at that point, like he wasn't getting any run for Dallas. So it's like, why not, give him an opportunity to play a little bit more. Mm-hmm. I just don't know if he has like the creative juice, that the Clippers are looking for to where he's like an upgrade over what they have at that position. But Sterling Brown is really interesting because if there is a defect in the Clippers roster, I happen to think it's like athleticism. And that's a weird thing to say because like they have a lot of good athletes, but they don't have anybody with like who sort of like jumps out at the gym,
Right.
And like if they had somebody who was a little bit like bouncier, a little bit springier, and that's Sterling Brown. That's like a really interesting fit. That's so interesting. I'm just like a little lost in my thoughts here because I really like that idea.
I was trolled on it
if
because I wrote about it and people wanted to know why I was wasting space on Sterling Brown. And I was like, who else do you want the Clippers to trade for?
I'm with you, Dan. That's kind of interesting because I'm not going to like go too much of what he was doing in Houston because it's hard to take away too much from what's happening with the Rockets right now. But he was in a strong defensive ecosystem in Milwaukee. Obviously, he was not getting a lot of time there, so I'm not sure if we can take away too much from that. But
yeah, the move was definitely keeping Pat Connaughton, but not Sterling Brown.
That's like the archetype, of the player I think that the Clippers should be looking for is just sort of like a young flyer of a guy. I noticed today that the Wizards are making some of their young guys available, like Troy Brown or Ivica Zubac, who I think make a lot of sense on the Clippers. Just, again, more wing defenders who have some bounce. Right. Mm-hmm. And I think it's like sort of the archetype you're looking for. But yeah, that's interesting. I would not have laughed at you when I read that.
I appreciate that. Ivica Zubac would be interesting. And
another former Laker to add to the rotation.
I'm also just laughing because I remember seeing the report that the Wizards were showcasing Troy Brown Jr. And I was like, so they've showcased him by playing him a total of 39 minutes over the past 11 games. Last thing on the Clippers for a move to the Lakers is, do you see what do you see a playoff rotation looking like for this team at full strength? Do you see anyone losing minutes? Does Luke Kennard have any wiggle room to work his way back into those plans? I also have theorized if you can get the Knicks involved, maybe is there a way to work out a Luke Kennard deal? Because then base year compensation doesn't matter if you can send another player into someone's cap space. But then it's if you're giving up Luke Kennard and another player, who are you trying to get back in that scenario? And so I'm just curious as to looking at how the Clippers have played now. Is there anyone whose role you would see demonstratively changing once they reach the postseason?
It's interesting. I think Terrence Mann's minutes might lower a little bit just because he is a little less consistent, than you might want in a playoff rotation. I think Ty Lue is going to want guys who exactly what to expect out of them on a game in and game out basis, and Terrence provides that spark, that energy, right? Like you mentioned, he's the only guy other than Zubac who actually gets a decent number of his shots at the rim. He's a good cutter, but he's not going to be guarded from the three-point line. We know that. He gets a little jumpy on defense, is not quite as solid as you'd want him to be. And I almost wonder if they'd be better off just giving that 8.5 man minutes to Luke Kennard because he can provide some playmaking, give, the other guys a little bit of rest on the offensive end. And then he's, despite what is theoretically a down season for him with the Clippers, he's a knockdown shooter, 40+% from 3-point range. So that might be it. You're going to have your top 8 of the starters plus Morris, Zubac, and Lue off the bench. And then I think that 8.5 will just be a split between Luke and Reggie, depending on what the situation calls for.
Is there anything I did not blow through with the Clippers that you think needs to be discussed about them?
No, I mean, I think if we've gotten to the Sterling Brown trade package, then we've hit just about everything.
Which would mean onto the Lakers. And the obvious point here is Anthony Davis, who's going to be out at least another 3+ weeks, I think that report said. So on a scale of not at all to oh shit, how concerned should the Lakers be about this right calf / Achilles tendinosis that he's dealing with?
Oh, I think we're like firmly on a 9 out of the oh shit 10 meter, because the fact that, there was a non-Laker report, right? I think it was Chris Haynes who said that he's going to be out even longer than what the Lakers originally said. You never want that to happen. Even though I know that the Lakers have more leaks than other teams around the league, just because people are more interested in what's going on here. This is not a team that's going to win a playoffs. I'm going to step that back for a second. This is not a team that's going to win 2 playoff series without Anthony Davis, right? Like it's not going to happen. There are too many good teams in the Western Conference. We've seen them just get their knocked off the floor with Utah and Phoenix, and I feel like a lot of other teams have blown them out with Anthony Davis out. But it's been bad. It's been really bad. And he was like the switch buster. Like he was just that piece that you put into the playoff series, and like all of a sudden the other team has no answers for you. During last year's postseason, I think there was a reasonable argument that he was better than LeBron James up until the finals. It's certainly more important to the Lakers up until the finals, when LeBron just had this, performance that was like, hey, I'm not going to give up my finals MVP. Like, it's not happening. I am very concerned, because like I can't help but think about the Kevin Durant situation, right? Where like it was a calf injury, and then he comes back to play, and 12 minutes later he's torn his Achilles. And nobody wants that, right? Like, you've just given a 5-year contract to Anthony Davis. He said part of the reason was because he was scared about his injury history, and lo and behold, here it is. I don't think that you can be like at a point where you're sacrificing this season because you have a 36-year-old LeBron James who didn't come to Los Angeles to sacrifice seasons. He already sacrificed one. So it's just really tricky, because I don't think the Lakers are in a position where they can afford to set him out, but that might be the healthiest option for him going forward. And it's hard to reconcile both of those competing aims. And it just sucks. It really sucks.
Yeah, I get skeeved whenever I just hear the word Achilles. That is my official take.
Like, I know we had the whole like, oh my God, Kevin Durant looks so great now. Like, can you imagine like a guy coming back from an Achilles and looking this good? And then like, when was the last time Kevin Durant played?
Yeah, he's dealing with hamstring stuff now. And also Anthony Davis is coming off the shortest offseason in sports history too.
It's really scary. And it's just a bummer, because the title race, I think, is really wide open this year, and you're just taking one team out of the picture if Anthony Davis is unavailable.
And kind of sticking with him, did you look at his shot problem, and were you at all concerned, or at least on my level, befuddled? I know he was Kevin Durant in the bubble for mid-range,
yeah.
but he wasn't really getting to the rim as much this year, and it wasn't because he was taking more threes like Frank Vogel asked. He was actually taking fewer of his shots from three-point range. And so is that mid-range volume, was that the byproduct of him trying to diversify his offense? Was he fatigued, out of shape? Was he injured before he was actually injured? It's been such a stark drop-off when you look at the rim to just the number of shots he was taking from mid-range.
So I will say that I'm a little bummed that he's not taking more threes, just because, he's been given the green light, and I think that would do wonders for the Lakers offense if Anthony Davis was a credible three-point shooter, not just in percentage, but also in volume. So yeah, that is a little bum. That's a bummer that he's not taking more threes. But as far as the mid-range, like Anthony Davis, it's funny because he's only had one like deep playoff run, but he sort of came into the season with a thing like, oh, I get it now. Like, I know what I have to do in the playoffs. So I'm just going to chill for most of the regular season. And like, I'm going to give it a good effort on defense because I know that's what the team needs. But on offense, like, I don't want to bang around against big guys. Like, I don't want to play center. I don't want to get in the post. I don't want to like, bruise up against these bigger guys. Like, I'm just going to hang out in mid range, take some jumpers and have a good time with it. And that's sort of how I saw the Anthony Davis regular season going. Like, I don't think it's anything to be worried about. It's just, it's a lot of effort to play the way he did during the playoffs, right? And it's a lot of effort to play the way Anthony Davis does when he's fully involved. So if he wants to just save it all for the defensive end and then just like be like a, mid-range assassin who's not really making his shots on offense, So be it.
I do think his importance to the defense has been underscored since he's out. And I know they've been missing Gasol for a little bit, and they were missing Schroder at one point. But the on-off numbers with him have always been weird. And I say always. This is only his second season in LA.
They have always been weird. I agree.
Yeah. And if you look at the lineups he uplifts, like to defensive mediocrity, you understand why. And they're 19th in defense since he's left. And I think, so that's at least underscored his value. And also I won't say they can't, but like Frank Vogel refuses to play Montrezl Harrell as much without him. And so part of his value is rooted there because like, doesn't it sort of feel like now, you mentioned how you sort of did a 180 on Trez last year. Doesn't it sort of feel like doesn't fit well with the Lakers anymore either?
I was totally on that train of what is Trez doing on this team for, I would say, the first 36 games of the season. And then they came back from the break. And against Indiana, he's the reason they win that game in the fourth quarter. That LeBron James, Montrezl Harrell, high pick and roll, and Harrell just, unguardable, rolling to the basket, or you can like leave LeBron to cover Harrell, right? Like it's really hard to defend that play. And then against the Warriors last night, just again, the Warriors are like an excuse for a good NBA team at this point. All due respect to Golden State, but like the Lakers went 27 out of 27 at the rim last night. Like Montrez was dunking everything in sight. He got James Wiseman picked up a tech, like trying to guard him. I mean, he has been so important just to bring like an extra level of force for the Lakers. And you think about what the Lakers' identity was last year, right? Like they were a big, like strong team that was just going to punk you, like just be like bigger, faster, stronger than you. And yeah, maybe Trez isn't bigger, but he's definitely faster and stronger. And he kind of resembles that Dwight Howard bully ball identity, even though he's like 6 inches shorter than Dwight was. So I actually am starting to see the fit with Trez. And it took some time because, they were playing him as the defensive five, even in those Anthony Davis lineups at the start of the season. And that makes no sense. Like, let's be clear. I get that you used the regular season to experiment. Frank, that was stupid. That was just a bad idea. And now they're, they're leveraging his speed a little bit more, right? They're bringing him up to the level of the screen and like making him rotate a little bit more instead of just hanging back and drop, because Trez can't do that. Like, I like a lot of things Trez does. That's not one of his strengths. So you're starting to see him optimized a little bit more. Like I know you mentioned Trez's minutes have gone down without Anthony Davis. I think that's peaked back up after the All-Star break. Now that, Vogel and the coaching staff have had some time to figure out how to use Trez in these situations, And I really do believe, I know it's only 2 games. And I made some cracks about Golden State, and Indiana is like a fine team. They're okay. They're not like a great team. So I shouldn't be putting too much stock into what Trez did in 2 games after the All-Star break, but I have a lot of faith in what Vogel and the coaching staff can do with the benefit of time. And I think there has been some sort of corner that they've turned in how to maximize Trez, especially in these non-Anthony Davis, non-Marc Gasol situations.
Maybe I'm just scarred from the end of his season with the Clippers.
It's quite possible. It left a really bad impression, a really bad impression. And as someone who watches these 2 teams a lot, I spent 30 games trying to get over it with Trez.
And I would be curious. I guess I would have to see it work in the postseason against certain matchups. Whereas you mentioned, just sort of no one on the Warriors is playing Trez really off the floor in the front court, and even with the Pacers, that's not. I mean, Sabonis is really good, but you could go to Sabonis or Turner at the 5, and that's not super mismatchy. So if this stands, I'm gonna have to rethink some Trez stuff.
Let's be clear. I'm not saying that it's going to hang in the playoffs quite yet, and I was pretty clear about that from the moment they signed him. But the regular season matters. You have to build habits and
survive it.
They have to get a good record, I think, because there are going to be fans in the playoffs, and you don't want to just be traveling to Utah all the time. There's altitude problems there too. So I think that there's a 10-15 minute role for him in the playoffs. I do believe that that's going to exist. And those minutes matter. All the non-LeBron minutes have just been a disaster for the Lakers the entire season. So I'm not saying quite yet that he's postseason ready, but I'm much closer to that than I was, a couple weeks ago.
Where do you view LeBron sort of in the MVP race if you were to build your own quick ladder? And do you think that I think obviously Joel Embiid's absence is going to help anyone who's in the MVP race at this point, but does AD's absence actually make his case stronger?
Well, it didn't help when they lost the first 4 games without him, I'll tell you that. But LeBron's got the narrative. I know I brought this up with the Clippers earlier. It's in LeBron's favor, He did not win MVP last year when I thought he should have. Get at me, all of you Giannis people with his statistical profile and whatever. Like, it was built up against playing the Knicks and the Hornets every single game. But
ooh, that is a level, that is spicy.
So yeah, I think LeBron was denied a rightful MVP last year, and I do think that he is aware of what that would mean for his place in history, right? Like, if you get to number 5 in terms of individual MVPs, now you're on a level with Michael and Bill Russell. It's very limited company, and let's be clear, like, that matters to him. I don't know if you were watching the Lakers-Warriors game last night, but he was 2 rebounds shy of a triple-double in the fourth quarter, right? There's about 8 minutes left. The Lakers are just obliterating the Warriors. There's no reason for LeBron to be on the court anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Kerr calls timeout, and you're thinking, okay, well, LeBron's going to sit, right? Because this is a natural stoppage. No, he comes back in, gets his second rebound. Okay, he gets his second rebound, deliberately fouls on the ensuing play, like the cheapest take foul you've ever seen so he can get out. And you look at the bench, and after he gets the rebound, both Lionel Hollins and Jason Kidd have tapped Frank, yo, now we can get him out.
He cares. So, that's when he says he doesn't care, you can't believe him.
The numbers matter to him, okay? He wants this 5th MVP. And they have an acceptable schedule over the next couple of weeks. So I think if LeBron can go on, a run while Joel is out, and they can get back to the 2 seed in the West, which is no small feat because Phoenix is just playing wonderfully. I think it's there for the taking. I thought Embiid had sort of gotten head and shoulders above anybody, but if record-wise they can be better than the Sixers, I don't think Joel's case is stronger than his. And that's not because I don't think that he's had a better season, because let's face it, I do think he has. But the storyline matters. And coming off the season that he just did, being 36 years old, I know that's not a criteria. It's not the best 36-year-old season. It's the best player in the league. But there's just a lot working for him. All of these factors sort of mesh together for LeBron, being able to carry the team after the shortest offseason without Anthony Davis, in the tougher Western Conference. I think it's all going to add up if he goes on a nice stretch over the next 2 weeks.
Yeah, I think the Embiid injury ends up being big for him because at some point, I think it's important to look at the quality of minutes. But when the quality of minutes is so high across the board, LeBron is, I think, 10th in total minutes played in the season right now. And so you don't even need to lean on and I think a lot of people, not you, but a lot of people are he's 36, and it's well, you can't really factor that in. That's not part of, but he also doesn't need
to
it.
Factor it in. I think you do.
Well, you do, but actually, I would argue you don't. Doesn't he have enough of a case where you laid it out for me, where it's he's coming off the short offseason. He's carrying the Lakers without Anthony Davis. There's a chance they finish second, third, first in the Western. If they finish top 2 in the West under all those circumstances, you can say, well, look at LeBron doing this at age 36, but is it Nikola Jokic's fault that LeBron is 10 years older than him or whatever it is?
You're right. You don't need the age, but I think it helps.
Oh, I think it helps. I just don't think it should, is my point.
Yeah. I find myself just amazed by it every time I think about it, which is why I can't help but bring it up.
Yes. I'm just dumbfounded by watching LeBron now. Can you think I don't know, 5-6 years ago, could you imagine a world in which LeBron takes step back 3-pointers and you don't think it's a terrible shot?
No.
And that's where we're at right now.
And it's funny because when he got to the Lakers, I had to sort of, wrap my head around the fact the Lakers got LeBron James, but this is going to be a more limited version of LeBron, right? He's not going to be the guy he was before. And it's no, that's not the case. He's just a cyborg, and this is what he does and has been doing for so many years. It's astounding.
I won't even read, click, pay attention to anyone just saying this is the year he drops off. He's earned primo benefit of the doubt. LeBron will exit his prime when LeBron wants to exit his prime. That's what I've decided. What have you thought about it feels like it's been a bizarrely controversial topic among Lakers fans. What have you made of the Marc Gasol experience so far?
So I'm glad you brought this up because I have a lot of strong Marc Gasol feelings.
Are they as strong as your Giannis Antetokounmpo winning MVP last year feelings?
You be the judge of that, Dan. I thought when the Lakers signed Marc that they were aware of how he played in the bubble, with Toronto. It's not great, let's be clear. And we're sort of hoping that he would return to how he had played for the majority of the regular season with the Raptors, because the bubble was sort of an anomalous experience, right? Like, I think they applied that same logic to Trez when they signed him. And I think the logic of signing Marc makes a lot of sense, because JaVale and Dwight were not playing down the stretch in the postseason. They weren't even starting games in the postseason, let's be clear. Like, they were increasingly not a part of the rotation.
Right.
So they were trying to find a center who could hang in those situations. And once you lost Dwight, you needed a guy who could go up against Joel, who could go up against Nikola Jokic. And I think Gasol has acquitted himself fairly well in those situations. Now, if you want him to like be athletic and like blocking shots at the rim, like, then why did you sign Marc Gasol? Like, it just seems like they're looking for someone who appears to be more like JaVale and Dwight, and he's not that guy. Like, a lot of the stuff he does is very nuanced, and the defensive rating when he's on the court is really good. And I think we saw during stretches of the season when you put him out on the perimeter and let him orchestrate the offense from the top of the key, like, he's really good at finding cutters and making the motion work. And for whatever reason, the Lakers didn't do a lot of that at the start of the season. They were still playing Anthony Davis out on the perimeter and like putting Gasol in the dunker spot. And it's like Gasol doesn't dunk. Like, why are we doing that?
That's like the finger roll spot for him or whatever.
Exactly, right? So it's kind of the Trez situation where I think he was just being misutilized at the start of the season. And at the time, and then of course, there's the fact that say what you will about JaVale and Dwight Howard, like, they are confident in their offense. They are very confident in their offense. Like, I don't know if you read like Zach Lowe's 10 things this week, but like the Dwight Howard dribbling adventures and JaVale McGee's, like, some of the shots that he takes in Cleveland, like, those guys will let it fly. Marc is not that guy. Marc is a lot more demure in the half-court offensive setting, right? Like, he gets an open three, he still thinks about the next pass. And it's just an adjustment for him to play the way the Lakers want him to, where they just want him to be a little bit more free, a little bit more decisive, a little less, let's do everything for the team. And I thought he was getting closer to that point before, he had to take this health and safety absence. So yes, the Lakers offense looks very different without that vertical spacing. And I would argue that is just complicated by the fact that their actual, 3-point spacing has just been shitty for the last few weeks. So that makes Marc look even worse because, the way the Lakers compensated for their bad shooting last year was because they had the vertical spacing, and they had neither for a little while there. So it was just like a confluence of factors that like made the Lakers look really bad, and they're looking for a scapegoat. And it's like, oh, well, let's put it on Marc Gasol. And I don't think that's fair. I think he's done exactly what the Lakers asked of him. I think he was getting even better before he had to sit out. And the fact that they think they need another center to augment this rotation, like, is stupid. If Damian Jones can play meaningful minutes for you on a 10-day, like, why are we wasting real resources to acquire a center?
Thank you.
I don't understand the discourse. It doesn't make any sense to me. Like, if you want to convert Damian Jones to the rest of the season contract, by all means do that. Like, I think he fills Quinn Cook's roster spot just as well as Quinn Cook did. Like, that's great. But no, do not put like actual assets into acquiring a center. That is a bad idea. And I don't think that if they got a center off the buyout market that he would even play minutes for them in the postseason, whereas Marc realistically could. So just let him, grow with the team. If we're going to give everybody else time to get better, got to give the same leeway to Marc Gasol.
Yeah, and the only reasonable way you should give up, first of all, the Lakers don't really have assets, but the only way you should actually give anything up for a big is if you actually think that Anthony Davis, for some reason, isn't going to be in the playoffs or something ready for that. And even then, it's just iffy because Anthony Davis is still going to be on your team for the next half decade, and it feels like they have other needs. Do you have time for a couple more questions, Troy? I'll let you go.
Mm-hmm.
This is, and you kind of touched upon this with the Gasol stuff. The Lakers offense, last year, everyone, got themselves all worked, or a lot of people got themselves worked up about, well, the offense is bad without LeBron. The half-court offense is mediocre in general. It falls off a cliff when he's not on the floor. And it's the same story this year. There are things that I think you can bank on, like KCP is going to start shooting better from three. Again, I would assume Wesley Matthews won't shoot sub 30% like he has been basically for most of the year. But is it something to actually be concerned about when I think part of the thought process was, and well, I clearly missed with the Gasol stuff. I thought maybe he was going to play a bigger part in those no LeBron minutes, and he really just hasn't. But the part of the reason I know he wasn't available for a good amount of time, but Dennis Schroder was supposed to like help with that. And the Lakers offense is still, when you look at the numbers, it's still sub-average when he's on the floor without LeBron. Is that something that they actually should be concerned about, or is this again a repeat of last year where it's, well, they're just going to get into the postseason and nothing's going to matter. They're going to shoot 1,000,000,000% from three for some reason, and LeBron's going to play 40-plus minutes a game when he didn't even have to last year because that's how good they were. And so I'm just curious as to where you land on that.
So assuming Anthony Davis is healthy and, at like 90% of the level that he was last postseason, which I realize is a strong assumption because he was damn good last year, then I don't think there's any reason for concern. I mean, this has been a trend for LeBron James teams since the beginning of time, I believe, like 7 CE, right? Like that's when LeBron James teams have been bad, when he's off the court, whether like Kyrie Irving is there or Dwayne Wade is there or Anthony Davis is there, they're just not good in the regular season without him. And I have just grown less concerned with that because he plays more minutes during the postseason and everybody's energy level just gets amped up at that time of the year. So it's not a huge concern. I do think that part of the impetus of bringing Schroder in was to address those minutes. I have to imagine that Pelinka and Vogel are a little bit disappointed with that in that respect because, you don't sacrifice a first round pick and a really good player in Danny Green to get a guy who's just going to be like German Rondo, right? Like that's not what they were hoping for. But
he does at least shoot off the dribble, which is something that Rondo probably
does. He make them? Like I don't know.
That was I didn't say that had to be the criteria.
The Schroder 3-point shooting experience has not been my favorite thing to watch. But anyway, the important thing about Schroder is that he plays really well next to LeBron James. And he was doing really well with LeBron James and Anthony Davis when that was an option earlier in the season. So yeah, you're not fixing the 14 minutes or so that LeBron James hasn't played in the regular season. I think Trez is more important for that. And again, I went into Trez a lot earlier. I think that's going to get better as the season goes on. But going forward, like when we think about Dennis Schroder potentially staying with the Lakers beyond this season, the fact that he fits with the stars, I think, is far more important than the fact that he's not able to prop up the non-star lineups. Because like you said, during the postseason, like it's just not as important.
And I guess lastly, what do you think actually is this team's biggest need if, leading into the trade deadline, or even if it's just longer term with them, something that's sort of the same question with the Clippers. I mean, the Lakers are just as limited, basically. I think they have a little bit more room beneath the hard cap, but they're not blessed with a ton of
much.
Yeah, and they're not blessed with a ton of assets. And what are you giving up Talon Horton Tucker with to one, bring back salary, and two, someone who's actually worth it? But do you see what is the need that you would, if you were them, that you would focus on at the trade deadline?
Yeah, I think they could use just another wing, which what team in the league could not use another wing, right? But yeah, the Clippers, I think it was more like a 1-2 that they were looking for, right? Whereas I think the Lakers could use more of a 3-4. Kyle Kuzma, I think, has been great. I know he was on the island. We didn't end up talking about him, but just a wonderful season for Kyle. The advanced numbers absolutely hate Kuzma. I don't understand what the deal is with that.
I think part of it is just some of those lineups that he's in with.
A lot of those bench lineups are just bad. But yeah, I think Kuzma's been really good. You can really trust him actually to be a good wing defender in the playoffs. Anthony Davis, I think, is the best wing defender that the Lakers have, and then obviously there's LeBron James. So there's options to work with if the Lakers don't find anybody on the buyout market. But I think that would be the number one concern because I always think about the Clippers matchup, and you can't, if you're going to go small, which I think you're going to have to if they're going to start Serge. You just can't put Marc Gasol in those groups. It's really hard for him to guard Ibaka. Then you're going to put Davis at the 5, so you can't have him guarding one of the 2 wings because then you lose all your rim protection. So then you put LeBron on Kawhi, and then who's guarding Paul George? It's a problem. They need somebody else there. I think they thought Wes Matthews was going to be that guy.
Oof.
It's been pretty bad. Yeah, woof indeed. The Wes Matthews experience has been less than ideal, I would say, for the Lakers so far.
It's been more rocky than most other Wes Matthews' experience.
I actually had not realized that this was the first time in his career that he'd not been starting regularly. That was something that had not occurred to me. Nothing about Wes Matthews to me screams starting lineup. But apparently that's a thing, and he's not accustomed to this limited role, and it's been hard for him, but I don't think that means that he should be starting because, let's face it, KCP has been really good. Dennis Schroder, I should take that back for a second. KCP has proven that he can be really good, and Dennis Schroder has been good. So, you're not going to make an adjustment for Wes Matthews. But yeah, if there was an option for a wing guy, I don't know, maybe I don't even know who's available because
I have 2 names that
couldn't hack it with the Kings.
I have 2 names that will once again, like with the Clippers, they're just going to blow you away because they're such doorbusters.
All right, I'm so excited, Dan. Let's do this.
The first one is Garrett Temple. I
I love Garrett Temple.
Yeah, and he's guarded some bigger guys this year. He definitely. I agree with you on the 3-4 stuff, and I think he's overstretched if that's how you view him. But he's
more of a 2-3. Yeah.
Yeah, and he gives them some extra ball handling, like with someone who can initiate a little bit. I don't think he'd be the answer in no LeBron minutes, but I don't think he would hurt.
Right.
And the other one is, and a lot of this is because the postseason will be taking place. If they have to go back inside the bubble, maybe I'll think differently about this, but Daniel House was the name that sprang to mind for me.
I mean, you could argue Daniel House won the Lakers the second round series last year.
He was their most valuable player in the second round.
Oh my gosh. Again, I'm going to cop to the fact that I haven't really watched much of the Rockets, so I can't comment too much on how.
Oh, he's been bad. He's been full stop. He's been bad. He's not shooting well, but I think he covers. He could basically defend 2 through 5 for you. And imagining him, and I'm assuming they'll close with Davis at the 5 in the postseason, which they don't really do in the regular season.
You just need more wings around him, right?
Yeah. And so that was my thought there. But I don't know that they're going to be able to do anything huge. I've already kept you longer than I said I would. So thank you so much for coming on, Sabrina. This was a joy.
Yeah, this was so much fun, Dan.
Well, rest assured, I'll be pestering you again in the future, as I'm sure you know by now. Follow Sabrina on Twitter if you guys have not already, at Sabrina JM. That's at SaBreeNaJM. She does a fantastic job covering the NBA at large and other stuff for SB Nation. So again, Sabrina, thank you again so much for coming on.
Yeah, happy to do it.
Hey, I'm Haley O'Shaughnessy. I'm Jordan Liggins. Our basketball podcast, Spinsters, is out now. Some weeks we're doing deep dives. Some weeks we're just talking about what happened this weekend. Listen to Spinsters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you get your podcasts.